Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadowman Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Samuel Thornton, but everyone calls me Sam. I've been a park ranger for 19 years now, working the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. Before that, I spent 12 years as a coal geologist, so I know rocks better than most people know their own backyards. I'm telling you this because what happened up on Dollyads changed everything I thought I knew about stone and earth, and I need you to understand that I'm not some city person who gets spooked by every owl hoot in the woods. I've pulled bodies out of collapsed mines. I've rappelled into caves so deep you can't see daylight from the bottom. I've never believed in ghost stories or portal legends. Always figured they were just cave acoustics playing tricks on people's minds. But sometimes the earth itself proves you wrong in ways that make you question everything. It was September 1977, and I was stationed at the Dollyads Wilderness area. If you've never been there, it's a high plateau about 4,000 feet up, covered in ancient rock formations that look like they belong on another planet. The Cherokee used to call it sacred land, said the stones sang to warn people away. German settlers back in the 1800s reported strange disappearances around the stone circles, but I always chalked that up to people getting lost in the fog. The plateau gets thick mist rolling in without warning, and those quartzite boulders can look like monsters when the fog's heavy. Easy to see how stories get started. My daughter Katie was 16 then, living with her aunt in town since her mother died 3 years back. Being a single dad and keeping a job that required weeks in the wilderness wasn't easy, but the ranger salary was all we had. Every morning I'd radio the station to let them know I was okay, and every evening I'd think about Katie doing her homework at her aunt's kitchen table, waiting for me to call me home. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. Dr. Richard Hayes from the university had taken a geological survey team up to the stone circles. You know, those ancient rock formations that sit in a perfect ring about 2 miles north of Bear Rocks. They were supposed to radio in every 12 hours. It had been 36 hours since anyone heard from them. "Sam," crackled the voice of my supervisor through the radio. "Need you to check on the Hayes survey team. Last position was grid reference 847 north, near the old Cherokee Stone Circle." I knew that area well. It was where the biggest quartzite formations stood, some of them 20 feet tall, arranged in a near-perfect circle about 50 yards across. Beautiful in a strange way, but it always felt wrong up there. The wind never sounded quite right when it moved through those stones. "Copy that," I radioed back. "Heading out now." I packed my gear, first aid kit, rope, emergency beacon, and my geological survey tools. Old habits from my mining days. The Brunton compass, the magnetometer for checking mineral deposits, the rock hammer that had saved my life more than once in collapsed mines. If the survey team was in trouble, I'd need to know exactly what kind of rock we were dealing with. The hike up to the stone circle took about 2 hours through thick forest that gradually thinned out to the windswept plateau. As I climbed higher, something felt off about the morning. The birds were too quiet. Even the ravens that usually cawed from the rock ledges were nowhere to be seen. When I reached the plateau, the first thing I noticed was the fog. It wasn't moving right. Instead of drifting with the wind, it seemed to be swirling in patterns around the stone formations. Geometric patterns, like someone was stirring it with invisible hands. I pulled out my compass to check my bearings, and my blood went cold. The needle was spinning in slow circles like it couldn't find magnetic north. In 19 years of wilderness work, I'd never seen anything like it. That's when I heard it for the first time. Sound like distant singing, so faint I thought it might be wind through the rocks. But wind doesn't harmonize with itself. Wind doesn't carry melodies that make your teeth ache and your bones vibrate. The Cherokee were right about one thing. Those stones definitely sang. I just didn't know yet that they were hungry. The Hayes survey team's base camp should have been visible from a quarter-mile away. Bright orange tents and silver equipment cases that would stand out against the gray stone like traffic cones. Instead, I found nothing but empty plateau and that strange swirling fog. I followed the GPS coordinates to the exact spot where they should have been camped. Grid reference 847 north, just like the radio report said. But there was no camp, no tents, no equipment cases, no sign that anyone had ever been there, except for the stones. The ancient rock circle looked different somehow. I'd been up there dozens of times over the years, always with the same 21 standing stones arranged in their perfect ring. Now there were 23. 2 new stones, each about 8 feet tall, standing where no stones had been before. I pulled out my notebook and started sketching the formation, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The 2 new stones were the same gray quartzite as the others, weathered like they'd been standing there for centuries. But I knew this circle like I knew my own face in the mirror. Those stones hadn't been there last month. My magnetometer started clicking like a Geiger counter near a uranium deposit. The readings were impossible. Magnetic fields strong enough to deflect a compass shouldn't exist in quartzite rock. I tapped the instrument, thinking it might be broken, but the clicking just got faster. That's when I found the first piece of equipment. Dr. Hayes's geological hammer was lying at the base of one of the new stones. It's steel buried 3 inches deep in solid rock, not wedged into a crack, actually embedded in the stone like someone had pressed it into wet clay that then hardened around it. I grabbed the handle and pulled, but it wouldn't budge. The rock had grown around it, I swear to God. Quartzite doesn't do that. Quartzite is millions of years old, harder than steel. You need diamond-tipped tools just to scratch it. But there was the hammer, sunk into stone like it was soft butter. I circled the formation, looking for more equipment, and found pieces scattered around each of the standing stones. A GPS unit fused halfway into a boulder. Coils of rope that disappeared into cracks that were too narrow for rope to fit through. A backpack pressed flat between 2 stones that should have had a 3-foot gap between them. It looked like the survey team's gear had been arranged in some kind of ritual pattern around the circle. But where were the people? The singing was getting louder now, a crystalline humming that seemed to come from inside the stones themselves. I pressed my ear against one of the formations and felt vibrations through the rock, like a tuning fork struck deep underground. My radio crackled to life. "Sam, this is base. Status report." I keyed the microphone. "Found the survey equipment, but no sign of the team. Something weird is happening with the rock formations up here. I'm going to need backup and maybe a search helicopter." "Copy that. Weather's moving in fast. Can you hold position until morning?" I looked at the sky. Dark clouds were rolling in from the west, and the wind was picking up. Getting caught in a storm on the plateau would be dangerous. But leaving meant abandoning any chance of finding the missing team. "I'll hold position," I radioed back, "but send that helicopter at first light." I set up my emergency shelter about 100 yards from the stone sea. Circle, close enough to keep watch, far enough to feel safe. At least, that's what I told myself. As darkness fell, the singing got stronger. Not louder exactly, but more complex. Harmonies, weaving together in patterns that made my head spin. I put on my headphones and tried to listen to the radio, but the static was overwhelming. Every frequency was filled with interference that sounded almost like voices. Around midnight, I saw the lights. They started as tiny sparkles inside the standing stones, like Christmas lights buried deep in crystal. Then they began to pulse in rhythm with the singing, growing brighter with each beat. The 2 new stones, the ones that hadn't been there before, were glowing the brightest. I grabbed my flashlight and crept closer to the circle. The light was coming from inside the rock itself, from veins of crystal I'd never noticed before. As I watched, the crystal veins seemed to be growing, spreading through the stone like cracks in ice. That's when I saw the face. In the surface of one of the new stones, the rock had formed features. Eye sockets, a nose, a mouth. Not carved, but grown. The crystal veins formed the eyes, glowing with that same cold light. And as I stared, the stone mouth opened and sang a single pure note that went straight through my bones. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering, telling myself it was just shadows and tired eyes playing tricks. But then another stone face opened its eyes, and another, until the whole circle was looking at me with expressions of stone and crystal. The Cherokee warnings echoed in my head. Sacred stones, guardian spirits, places where the earth itself was alive. I'd always thought they were just stories to keep people away from dangerous terrain. I was beginning to understand that some stories are warnings. I didn't sleep that night. How could I with those stone faces watching me from across the plateau? Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear that crystalline singing getting closer, and I'd snap awake to check that the stones were still in their circle. By dawn, they'd move. At Dallas, not far, just a few feet closer to my shelter. But solid rock formations don't slide across bedrock without leaving marks. I checked the ground where they'd been standing and found smooth stone underneath, no sign of dragging or rolling. It was like they'd simply chosen to be somewhere else. My radio wouldn't work at all now. Nothing but static and those voice-like sounds that made my skin crawl. The interference was so strong it was affecting my watch. The hands were spinning backward, and the digital display was showing impossible times. I packed up my gear and hiked to higher ground, trying to get a signal to call for help. From the ridge above the stone circle, I could see the whole formation spread out below me. That's when I realized the 21 original stones had formed a perfect spiral pattern, with the 2 new stones at the center. And there were people inside the spiral. I pulled out my binoculars and focused on the center of the formation. 3 figures were standing between the stones, but they weren't moving. Not at all. They stood perfectly still like statues, their backs to me, facing inward towards something I couldn't see. "Hayes!" I shouted down at them. "Dr. Hayes, can you hear me?" No response. The figures didn't even turn around. I made my way down the slope, calling out to the survey team, but they remained motionless. As I got closer, I could see they were wearing the right clothes. Hayes in his red flannel shirt, the graduate student Karen in her hiking boots, Tony with his equipment belt, but something was wrong with their posture. They stood too straight, too rigid, like they were frozen in place. I reached the outer edge of the stone circle and stopped. The singing was so loud now it was making my vision blur. The ground under my feet was vibrating in rhythm with the harmonies, and I could feel the vibrations in my chest, my bones, my teeth. "Hayes!" I called again, but my voice sounded strange, distorted by the acoustic effects of the stone formation. That's when one of them turned around. It was Dr. Hayes, but his eyes were gone. In their place were clusters of crystal that glowed with the same cold light as the stones. His mouth opened, and instead of words, that same crystalline note poured out, harmonizing with the song from the rocks. Karen turned next, then Tony. All of them with crystal eyes, all of them singing in perfect harmony with the stones. They weren't people anymore. They were part of whatever was happening in that circle. I backed away slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. The stone faces were watching me again, and I could feel their attention like a physical weight. The crystal eyes in the rock formations were tracking my movement, waiting for something. That's when I heard the helicopter. The sound came from the south, growing louder as it approached the plateau. I ran toward the noise, waving my arms and shouting, though I knew they couldn't hear me over the rotor wash. The helicopter was a Park Service rescue bird, the kind we used for medical evacuations and search operations. It circled the plateau once, then began to descend toward a flat area about 200 yards from the stone circle. "No!" I screamed, running toward the landing zone. "Don't land! Get out of here!" But they couldn't hear me. The helicopter touched down, and I saw Maria Santos climb out of the passenger seat. Maria was our best cave rescue specialist, someone I'd worked with on a dozen emergency calls. She had rappelling gear and medical supplies. She'd come to help find the survey team. The pilot kept the rotors spinning while Maria jogged toward me, her equipment bag bouncing against her hip. "Sam," she called out, "we got your position from the GPS beacon. Where's the missing team?" I pointed toward the stone circle, where the 3 figures were still standing motionless in their spiral formation. "Maria, we need to get out of here right now. Something's wrong with Diane. Jose's stones." She looked where I was pointing and frowned. "Are they hurt? Why aren't they moving?" They're not people anymore, Maria. Look at their eyes." She pulled out binoculars and studied the figures in the circle. I watched her expression change from concern to confusion to fear. "Jesus," she whispered. "What happened to them?" The singing was getting louder, and I could see the stone faces beginning to emerge more clearly from the rock formations. The crystal veins were spreading, growing brighter, and the ground was starting to vibrate so hard that loose rocks were bouncing. "We need to leave now," I told her, grabbing her arm. "Tell the pilot to take off." But when we turned back toward the helicopter, it was sinking. The landing skids were disappearing into what should have been solid bedrock, the aircraft tilting as it settled into stone like it was quicksand. The pilot was trying to increase power, but the rotors were hitting resistance, slowing down despite the engine noise. He looked toward us through the windscreen, his face showing panic as he realized his aircraft was being swallowed by the earth. "Run!" I shouted to Maria, but the ground under our feet was changing too. What had been solid rock a moment before was now soft, yielding, pulling at our boots like thick mud. The stone circle was doing something to the entire plateau, changing the nature of reality itself within its influence. Maria tried to run but stumbled as the ground grabbed her ankle. She went down hard, her equipment scattered across the rock that was no longer rock. I reached for her hand, but my own feet were sinking into the stone. The singing reached a crescendo, and the stone faces opened their mouths wide. From inside each mouth came a beam of crystal light that met at the center of the circle, forming a pillar of pure white energy that stretched up into the sea. Kai. Inside that pillar of light, I could see shapes moving, other places, other worlds, glimpses of landscapes that shouldn't exist. The stone circle wasn't just alive, it was a doorway, and something on the other side was trying to come through. The helicopter disappeared completely into the stone, leaving only a smooth surface where it had been. The pilot's screams cut off suddenly like someone had thrown a switch. Maria was waist-deep in what looked like solid rock, her hands clawing at the surface as she sank deeper. "Sam!" she screamed. "Help me!" I lunged forward, grabbing her shoulders, but the stone was pulling her down with impossible strength. It wasn't quicksand or mud. It was rock that had somehow become fluid while still looking solid. My hands found hers just as the stone reached her chest. "My equipment," she gasped, pointing to her gear bag. "The iron pythons, cave anchors." I grabbed her climbing gear and pulled out a handful of iron spikes, the kind climbers use to secure ropes in rock faces. As soon as the metal touched the stone around Maria, it solidified instantly. She stopped sinking. "Iron," I whispered, understanding flooding through me. The old stories always mentioned iron. I drove more pitons into the ground around her, creating a barrier of metal that the stone couldn't seem to cross. It bought us time, but not much. The crystal light from the circle was getting brighter, and I could hear something moving inside that pillar of energy. Something large and ancient and very, very angry. The three figures that had been the survey team were walking toward us now, their crystal eyes blazing, their movements stiff and mechanical. They no longer looked human at all. They were puppets made of flesh and stone, controlled by whatever intelligence lived inside the rock circle. "Sam," Maria said, her voice tight with pain. "I can feel it trying to change me. The stone. It's not just trapping me. It's trying to make me part of it." I looked down and saw what she meant. Where the rock touched her skin, her flesh was taking on a gray, crystalline appearance. The transformation was slow but steady, creeping up her torso toward her heart. "The Cherokee knew," I said, pulling out my geological hammer. "They called this place sacred because they knew what lived here. Ancient guardians, protectors of doorways between worlds. We disturbed something that was meant to stay hidden." The stone faces in the circle were fully formed now, emerging from the rock like sculptures coming to life. They were beautiful in a terrible way, features carved from living crystal, expressions of inhuman intelligence and patience. These weren't monsters. They were sentinels, and we'd triggered their defense systems. But sentinels could be reasoned with. At least I hoped they could. I raised my voice over the harmonic singing. "We didn't know! We didn't mean to disturb your sacred place!" The singing paused, and for a moment the plateau was completely silent. Then one of the stone faces spoke, its voice like grinding granite. Knowledge does not excuse trespass. The doorway must remain sealed. The guardians must be fed. Take me instead, I said, stepping toward the circle. Let her go, and the others. I'll stay as your guardian. The stone face considered this, its crystal eyes studying me with alien intelligence. You understand stone and earth. You could serve effectively, but the others have already been chosen. The transformation cannot be undone. I looked at the three figures that had been the survey team. They were closer now, and I could see that they weren't completely gone. There was still humanity in their crystal eyes, trapped and screaming silently. They were prisoners in their own bodies, forced to serve as guardians for these ancient doorways. Maria, I said quietly, can you move your arms? She tested her mobility and nodded. Barely, but yes. When I say run, pull yourself out using the iron spikes, and head for the tree line. Don't look back, no matter what you hear. Sam, what are you— There's only one way to stop this, I said, hefting my geological hammer. I have to break their harmony. Every geologist knows that crystal formations have resonant frequencies. The right vibration can shatter them completely. The Cherokee stories mentioned it too, though I'd never understood before. Iron disrupted their power, but sound could destroy them entirely. I raised the hammer and brought it down hard on the nearest stone face. The iron head rang against crystal like a church bell, sending shockwaves through the entire formation. The harmonic singing faltered, became discordant. The stone face screamed. Run! I shouted to Maria. She pulled herself free of the softened rock and stumbled toward safety while I swung the hammer again and again. Each blow sent cracks, spider-webbing through the crystal veins, disrupting the network that connected all the stones. The guardians were trying to stop me now. The three transformed humans rushed forward, their movements faster and more coordinated than any living person could manage. But they were still partly human, still vulnerable to physical damage. I swung the hammer in a wide arc, catching the figure that had been Dr. Hayes in the chest. It staggered backward, crystal fragments falling from the wound like broken glass, but it didn't fall down, didn't stop coming. More cracks appeared in the stone faces as I continued my assault on their network. The pillar of light was flickering now, becoming unstable. Whatever was trying to come through from the other side was having trouble maintaining its connection. But I was running out of time. My swings were getting weaker, and there were three guardians between me and freedom. The hammer was heavy, and I could feel my strength fading. That's when Maria came back. She appeared at the edge of the circle with an armload of iron tent stakes and climbing gear, driving the metal spikes into the ground in a rough circle around the stone formation. You didn't think I'd lapul. Eve, you did you? She called out, her voice strained but determined. The iron barrier was working. The stone guardians couldn't cross the metal perimeter, and the power feeding the crystal network was being disrupted. The pillar of light collapsed completely, and the doorway slammed shut with a sound like thunder. One by one, the stone faces went dark. The crystal eyes dimmed, and the harmonic singing faded to silence. The three transformed humans collapsed like marionettes with cut strings, their crystal features cracking and falling away to reveal the flesh underneath. But they were still breathing. We got them out alive, Hayes, Karen, and Tony. The medical team said they'd suffered severe trauma and memory loss, but their vital signs were stable. The crystal growths on their skin faded over several days, leaving only faint scars that looked like mineral veins under their flesh. None of them remembered what happened in the stone circle. The doctors said it was psychological trauma blocking the memories, but I think it was something else. I think the Guardians took those memories when they released their hold, erasing the evidence of what the survey team had seen. The official report listed it as a geological emergency. Unstable rock formations creating hazardous conditions. The stone circle area was declared off-limits indefinitely, marked with warnings about magnetic anomalies and structural instability. The helicopter was listed as lost in a sinkhole, the pilot's body never recovered. Maria and I both requested transfers out of the wilderness areas. She went to work search and rescue in the city, where the worst thing you might find is someone trapped in a collapsed building. I took a desk job with the Park Service, pushing paperwork and filing incident reports. Because I can't go into caves anymore, can't even walk through the rock formations at the park's main visitor center without feeling like the stones are watching me. The claustrophobia started the day after we escaped the circle, and it's gotten worse over the years. My daughter Katie thinks it's because I'm getting older, more cautious. She doesn't know about the nightmares where I hear crystal voices calling my name. Maria visits sometimes. We don't talk about what happened on the plateau, but we both check the geological survey reports from across the Appalachian region. Strange readings at Cherokee sacred sites, equipment malfunctions near ancient stone formations, survey teams reporting unexplained phenomena and memory gaps. The Guardians aren't gone. They're just sleeping again, waiting for the next group of people who think they understand the Earth better than the ones who lived here for thousands of years before us. I keep thinking about what that stone face told me, that the doorway must remain sealed. Sealed from what? What was trying to come through from the other side, and how many other doorways are scattered across these mountains? Last month, Katie started talking about studying geology in college. Wants to follow in her old man's footsteps, she says. Do important research, help people understand the natural world. I've been trying to talk her into something else. Anything else. Maybe law school, or medicine, or teaching. Something that keeps her in cities, far from ancient stones and sacred places where the earth itself might be watching. Because I know now that some places aren't meant for people like us. Some stones are better left unturned, some songs are better left unheard, and some doors should stay locked forever. But late at night, when the wind is blowing just right through the trees outside my house, I can still hear it. That crystalline harmony calling from the mountains. The Cherokee were right about those stones. They do sing, and they're still hungry. My name is Jacob Brennan, but everyone calls me Jake. I've been a ranger in the Daniel Boone National Forest for 15 years now, and I thought I'd seen just about everything these Kentucky mountains could throw at me. Drug labs hidden in caves, illegal hunting operations, lost hikers who wandered off marked trails. You name it, I've dealt with it. I'm 40 years old, married to Sarah, and we've got 2 little ones at home. Before I took this job, I spent 8 years as military police, so I know how to handle myself in tough situations. I carry a .357 revolver on my belt and a Motorola radio that usually works pretty well, except in some of the deeper hollows where the mountains block the signal. The thing is, I never believed in ghost stories or witch tales. My grandmother used to tell me all sorts of scary stories about the old mountain folk and their strange ways, but I figured that was just entertainment for us kids. Mountain people have always had their superstitions, and I respected that, but I never thought any of it was real. That all changed in November of 1982. It started when 2 hikers went missing near an old settlement deep in the Red River Gorge area. David and Sarah Chen, a married couple from Lexington who came up for a weekend camping trip. They were supposed to check in with the ranger station on Sunday evening, but they never showed up. By Tuesday morning, we had to start looking for them. The last place anyone saw them was near the mouth of a hollow about 31 miles from the nearest town. You can't drive back there. You have to hike in on old deer trails that aren't marked on any official map. It's the kind of place that feels forgotten by the world, where the mountains rise up on both sides like green walls and the trees grow so thick they block out most of the sky. I hiked in there on a cold Wednesday morning in late November. The weather had been strange that year. We'd already had 2 hard freezes, and most of the leaves had fallen. Everything should have been brown and dead, getting ready for winter. But when I reached the old settlement, something was wrong. There was a garden there, right next to the ruins of what used to be somebody's homestead. And that garden was green. Not just green, it was thriving. Tomatoes hung heavy on the vine, fat and red like it was the middle of July. Cornstalks stood tall and healthy, their ears full and ready for harvest. Squash vines crawled everywhere, covered with bright yellow blossoms and perfect vegetables. I stopped and stared at that impossible garden. The morning frost was still white on the grass around it, but inside that small plot of land, Everything grew like it was the best growing season anyone had ever seen. I pulled out my radio and tried to call back to the station, but all I got was static. That wasn't unusual in the deep hollows, but it made me feel more alone than I liked. I took out my compass to mark my position, and the needle pointed straight toward the center of the garden instead of north. That should have been my first warning to leave. But I was there to find David and Sarah Chen, and I had a job to do. I started looking around the ruins of the old cabin, calling their names. The stone foundation was still solid, but the wooden walls had mostly rotted away. An old well sat nearby, covered with a flat stone. Behind the cabin, I could see the remains of what used to be a tobacco barn. The silence in that hollow felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. No birds sang, no squirrels chattered in the trees. Even the wind seemed to avoid the place. The only sound was my boots crunching on the frost-covered leaves. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. There were personal belongings scattered around the edge of that green gauze. Den, a blue backpack that looked new, a pair of hiking boots, still tied like someone had just stepped out of them, a camera with a strap that had been cut, not broken. I was looking at David and Sarah Chen's gear, arranged in a neat circle around what looked like some kind of altar made from stacked stones. I drew my gun without really thinking about it. 15 years of law enforcement training kicked in, and I started treating this like a crime scene instead of a missing persons case. Someone had taken that couple, and their belongings had been placed here for a reason. I walked carefully around the edge of the garden, looking for any sign of the hikers themselves. That's when I noticed the small wooden dolls. They were carved from what looked like mountain laurel wood, about 6 inches tall, and they were crude but detailed enough to look human. One had long black hair attached to its head with some kind of tree sap. The other had shorter brown hair. Both dolls were stuck into the ground at the 4 corners of the garden, along with what looked like bundles of dried herbs tied with string. I'd seen enough drug operations to know what herb bundles usually meant, but these didn't smell like marijuana. They smelled like something from my grandmother's medicine cabinet, sharp and bitter, with a green scent that made my nose itch. I was photographing the scene with my camera when I heard it for the first time. Singing. It was an old woman's voice, thin and high, carrying across the hollow like smoke. She was singing something that sounded familiar, like a song I might have heard when I was little, but I couldn't make out the words. The melody was sweet and sad, the kind of tune that gets stuck in your head and won't leave. I followed the sound toward the tobacco barn ruins, keeping my gun ready. The singing got louder as I got closer, but I couldn't see anyone. The old barn was just a skeleton of wooden posts and a few pieces of tin roofing that rattled in the wind. But behind the barn, I found them. David and Sarah Chen were lying in neat rows between plants that grew directly from the earth, no garden beds or furrows. They were on their backs with their hands folded over their chests, and their eyes were closed like they were sleeping. They looked peaceful, but their skin had a waxy, unnatural color. I holstered my gun and knelt down to check for a pulse on David. His skin was cold, but not stiff like you'd expect from someone who'd been dead for days. When I lifted his eyelid, his pupil was huge and didn't react to the light at all. That's when I noticed the plants growing around them. The vegetables were bigger and more perfect than anything I'd ever seen. Tomatoes the size of softballs, ears of corn as long as my forearm, squash that would have won prizes at any county fair. And they were all growing directly from the soil around the bodies, like the hikers were fertilizing them. I was reaching for my radio to call this in when the singing stopped. The silence that followed felt like being underwater. My ears popped, and I could hear my own heartbeat. Then a voice spoke from somewhere behind me, clear as day. "You found my garden." I spun around with my gun drawn, but there was nobody there. Just the ruins and the forest and that impossible green garden in the middle of November. "Who's there?" I called out. "This is Forest Service law enforcement. I need you to come out where I can see you." Laughter drifted from the direction of the old cabin, high and crackling like a fire made of dry leaves. "Been waiting for someone like you," the voice said. It was definitely an old woman with a thick mountain accent that sounded like it came from 50 years ago. Someone strong, someone who knows how to take care of things. I moved toward the cabin ruins, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to show yourself. We can talk about whatever's going on here." "Oh, we'll talk," she said. "We'll talk about a lot of things. But first you need to understand what you're looking at." The air around the garden started to shimmer, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. The plants began to move, even though there wasn't any wind. Tomato vines curled and twisted, reaching toward me like fingers. Corn stalks swayed in patterns that looked almost like dancing. I backed away from the garden, keeping my gun aimed at the cabin ruins. "Ma'am, I don't know what kind of chemicals you've got here, but you need to come out now. We can work this out." That's when I saw her for the first time. She stepped out from behind the stone foundation like she'd been there all along, even though I knew I'd already searched that area. She was old, probably in her 80s, with long gray hair hanging loose around her shoulders. Her dress looked like something from my great-grandmother's time, all hand-sewn with an apron tied around her waist. But it was her eyes that made me take another step backward. They were completely white, like she was blind from cataracts, but she looked right at me like she could see perfectly fine. And in the center of each white eye, there was a tiny point of light that seemed to glow in the shadow of the hollow. "Welcome to my home," she said, smiling with teeth that were too white and too sharp. "I've been hoping someone like you would come along." I kept my gun trained on her, but something felt wrong about the whole situation. This old woman didn't look dangerous, just strange. But David and Sarah Chen were dead, and their belongings were arranged around her garden like some kind of ritual. "Ma'am, I'm Ranger Jacob Brennan with the Forest Service. I need to ask you some questions about these two people." I gestured toward the bodies behind the barn without taking my eyes off her. She tilted her head like a bird studying a bug. "Questions? Oh, I got plenty of answers. Been living in this hollow for more years than you've been breathing, young man. I know everything about everyone who comes through here." "Did you hurt those hike?" "Ours?" She laughed again, that dry, crackling sound. "Hurt them? Child, I helped them. They were lost and hungry and scared. I gave them food from my garden and a place to rest. They're sleeping peaceful now." I could hear my radio crackling with static in my belt, but I couldn't risk taking my attention off her to try calling for backup. "Those people are dead, ma'am. That's not sleeping." "Dead?" She looked genuinely surprised. No, they're working. They're part of the garden now, part of something bigger and more important than their little lives ever were." She gestured toward the plants, and I swear they moved in response to her hand motion. The tomato vines reached higher, the corn stalks rustled, and the squash blossoms opened wider. "See? They're helping things grow. Their strength is feeding the earth, making it rich and green. It's beautiful work, the most important work there is." I was starting to understand that I wasn't dealing with just some crazy old woman living in the woods. This was something else, something that didn't fit into any training I'd ever received. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step away from the garden and come with me. We need to get some medical attention for those people." "Medical attention?" She cackled and clapped her hands together. "Oh, honey, ain't no doctor going to help them now. They're past all that. But you're different. You're strong and healthy, and you got something special about you, something I can use." That's when I heard the rustling. It came from all around me, from the trees, from the underbrush, from the garden itself. Something was moving through the forest, lots of somethings, and they were coming closer. Animals started emerging from the woods. Not just one or two, but dozens of them. Deer that should have been spooked by human scent walked calmly into the clearing. Raccoons climbed down from trees and sat in neat rows like they were waiting for instructions. Even a black bear shuffled out of the undergrowth and settled down on its haunches, watching me with intelligent eyes. But the strangest part was that they were all looking at the old woman, not at me, like they were waiting for her to tell them what to do. "You see?" she said, spreading her arms wide. "Everything in this hollow is part of my family. The plants, the animals, even the earth itself. We all work together, and we all help each other." I was slowly backing toward the trail that had brought me into the hollow, but more animals kept appearing to block my path. A line of wild turkeys strutted across the trail entrance. A family of possums waddled out to sit between me and escape. "Now, you're going to be part of the family too," she continued. "It won't hurt much, just like going to sleep, same as your friends there. And when you wake up, you'll understand how important this work is." She pulled something from her apron pocket, a small wooden doll that looked just like the ones I'd seen in the garden, but this one was clearly carved to look like a man. It even had brown hair attached to its head that looked suspiciously like my own color. "How did you—" I started to ask, but then I remembered running my hand through my hair while I was examining the scene. She must have collected strands that I'd left behind. "Hair is powerful," she said, holding up the doll. "Hair and fingernails and blood, they connect a person to their body and their soul. With just a little bit of someone, you can do all sorts of useful things." She started singing again, the same haunting melody I'd heard earlier. But this time the words were clear. Come to me, child of the mountain. Come to me, drink from my fountain. Your strength will feed the earth, your life will make things grow. Come to me, you belong here now." The moment she started singing, something happened inside my head. The fear I'd been feeling began to fade away, replaced by a strange sense of peace. The gun in my hand felt too heavy to hold up. My legs felt weak, like I'd been walking for hours. Part of my mind, the part that had been trained by the military and tempered by 15 years of law enforcement, was screaming at me to run, to fight, to do something. But that voice was getting smaller and more distant, like it was coming from the other end of a long tunnel. The old woman kept singing, and the animals around me started swaying back and forth in rhythm with the music. The plants in the garden were moving too, bending and twisting like they were dancing. I found myself taking a step toward her, then another. The gun slipped from my fingers and hit the ground with a thud that seemed to come from very far away. "That's right," she said, still singing. "Come join the family. Come help things grow." But then something caught my eye. A glint of metal among David Chen's belongings. It was a small silver cross on a chain, probably something Sarah had been wearing. The cross was lying on the ground near the stone altar, and for some reason, the sight of it cut through the fog in my head like a knife. I thought about my own family, Sarah waiting for me at home, our 2 kids who needed their father to come back safely. I thought about Sunday mornings in our little church and the prayers my grandmother had taught me when I was small. Without really planning it, I started reciting the Lord's Prayer under my breath. "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." The old woman's singing faltered, and her white eyes narrowed. "Now what are you doing there, child? Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven." I kept praying, and with each word my head felt a little clearer. She stopped singing entirely and pointed the wooden doll at me like a weapon. "You stop that right now. You don't understand what you're interfering with." But I kept praying. Louder now, and I could feel my strength coming back. The animals around me started to look confused, like they were waking up from a dream. A few of them wandered back into the woods. That's when the old woman got angry. "Fine!" she shrieked, her voice changing from sweet and grandmotherly to something harsh and wild. "If you won't come willing, I'll take what I need." She raised the wooden doll above her head and started chanting in a language I didn't recognize. Something that sounded older than English, older than any human speech I'd ever heard. The plants in the garden went crazy. Tomato vines shot out like whips, trying to wrap around my legs. Corn stalks bent down toward me, their leaves sharp as razor blades. The whole garden seemed to come alive, reaching for me with roots and stems and thorns. I dove for my gun and rolled away from the grabbing plants, still praying as loud as I could. The cross on the ground was glowing now, actually glowing with a soft silver light that seemed to hurt the old woman's eyes. "You can't fight me," she screamed. "This is my place, my hollow. Everything here obeys me." But something was wrong with her magic. The animals were shaking their heads like they were confused, and some of them were already running back into the forest. The plants were still moving, but slower, like they were fighting against her control. I grabbed my gun and pointed it at her, but I had a feeling bullets weren't going to solve this problem. "Who are you?" I shouted over the noise of rustling plants and confused animals. "What are you?" She stood up straighter, and suddenly she looked different. taller, more solid, with power crackling around her like electricity. I am Isabel Hicks, and this hollow has been my home since before your great-grandfather was born. I learned the old ways from my Cherokee grandmother, the ways of root and leaf and growing things. I keep the balance here, I make things flourish, and I take what I need to continue the work. You're killing people! I'm making them useful, she snapped back. Those city folk, they come here with their loud voices and their heavy boots, tramping through my woods like they own them. They take and give nothing back. So I make them give back. I make them part of the life cycle, part of the growing and the flowering and the harvest. She held up the wooden doll again, and I could feel something tugging at my chest, like she was trying to pull something out of me. Their souls feed my garden, and their bodies nourish the soil. It's the most natural thing in the world, more honest than any life they were living before. I kept praying, fighting against the pulling sensation, and grabbed the silver cross from the ground. The moment my fingers touched it, the tugging stopped. Cold iron and holy silver, she hissed, backing away from me. Old weapons for old battles. But you can't carry them forever, boy. You can't stay awake and praying every moment for the rest of your life. That's when I realized she was right. Even if I got out of this hollow, she'd still be here, still waiting for the next lost hiker, the next person who wandered into her territory. And I was the only one who knew what she was doing. I won't let you hurt anyone else, I said, still holding the cross. She laughed, but it wasn't the sweet, grandmotherly laugh from before. It was bitter and cold. You think you can stop me? Child, I've been doing this work since before your country was even named. I've seen soldiers and settlers and loggers and hunters, and they all end up the same way, feeding my garden, helping things grow. But as she talked, I noticed something. The farther I moved from her garden, the weaker her control seemed to get. The animals closest to the forest edge were already gone, and the plants weren't reaching as far as they had before. Your power has limits, I said, taking another step backward toward the trail. It only works in this hollow, her white eyes flashed with anger. Smart boy. Yes, I'm bound to this place by blood and bone and old promises. But that just means I have to be more careful about who I let leave. She raised the wooden doll one more time and spoke a single word in that ancient language. The doll burst into flames in her hands, and I felt like someone had driven a red-hot poker through my chest. I screamed and fell to my knees, clutching the cross so hard it cut into my palm. But my blood dripping on the silver seemed to make it glow brighter, and the burning sensation in my chest began to fade. Blood and faith, I gasped, understanding suddenly. That's what breaks your power. Blood freely given and faith freely chosen. She stared at me with those terrible white eyes, and for the first time, I saw fear in them. I stood up, still holding the bloody cross, and walked directly toward her. Every step was like walking through thick mud, and I could feel her trying to get into my head again, with her songs and her promises. But I kept praying, kept thinking about my family, kept believing that there was something stronger than her ancient magic. When I got close enough to touch her, she suddenly looked very small and very old. The power that had been crackling around her was gone, and she was just a frightened woman in an old dress. Please, she whispered. I never meant any harm. I just wanted things to grow. I just wanted to help. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I looked back at David and Sarah Chen, lying so peacefully among her impossible plants, and I knew what I had to do. I touched the bloody cross to her forehead and said, I forgive you, but I can't let you continue. She screamed, not with her voice, but with something deeper, something that seemed to come from the earth itself. The scream went on and on until it felt like the whole hollow was crying out. Then she was gone. Just gone, like she'd never been there at all. The plants in her garden withered and died in seconds, turning brown and crumbling to dust. The impossible vegetables rotted white. Ere they hung, and the green leaves fell like snow in the sudden silence. David and Sarah Chen opened their eyes and sat up, looking around in confusion. They were pale and weak, but they were alive. It took me 3 hours to get David and Sarah back to the main trail where the rescue team could reach us. They didn't remember much about what had happened, just that they'd gotten lost and found a nice old woman who offered them food and a place to rest. The official report listed it as a case of severe hypothermia and hallucinations caused by exposure. The county coroner said the Chens had been in some kind of catatonic state, probably brought on by eating the wrong kind of mushrooms. The impossible garden was explained as a natural hot spring that had created a microclimate. I never told anyone the truth about what I'd seen in that hollow. Who would have believed me? But I did some research after I got home. I found records of an Isabel Hicks who was born in that hollow in 1832, the daughter of a Cherokee woman and a Scottish settler. The records showed she'd died in 1951 at the age of 119, but there were stories about her going back much further than that. Stories about a woman who could make things grow in the dead of winter, who could talk to animals, who could heal the sick and curse the wicked. The stories also mentioned that she'd never married, never had children, and lived alone in that hollow for decades. People brought her their problems: sick livestock, failed crops, family feuds that needed settling, and she helped them for a price. I also found newspaper reports going back to the 1920s about people disappearing near that hollow, hunters who never came home, hikers who got lost and were never found. Always just one or two at a time, always far enough apart that nobody connected them to the same place. The hollow is officially closed now. The Forest Service put up signs saying the area is contaminated and dangerous to enter. But I know that won't stop everyone. There are always people who ignore warnings, who think they know better, who want to see what they're not supposed to see. I put in for a transfer 6 months later, told my supervisor I wanted to work closer to home, be near my family more. That was true, as far as it went. But the real reason was that I couldn't stand being in those deep woods anymore, couldn't handle the silence and the shadows and the feeling that something might be watching me from behind the trees. I still carry that silver cross, and I go to church every Sunday now. My wife thinks it's because I'm getting older and more thoughtful, and I let her think that. It's easier than explaining that I've seen proof that there are things in this world that are older and stranger and more dangerous than most people can imagine. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I can hear singing. Old mountain ballads drifting through the darkness, sweet and sad and compelling. When that happens, I get up and check on my children, make sure they're safe in their beds. Then I sit by the window and pray until morning comes. I know Isabel Hicks is gone. I saw her die, felt her power break like a snapped wire. But she wasn't the only one who knew the old ways. There are other hollows in these mountains, other settlements where the old families lived and learned and passed down their secrets. And there are always people who go looking for things they shouldn't find. So if you ever find yourself hiking in the deep woods of Kentucky and you come across a place where things grow too well, where the silence feels heavy and wrong, where animals watch you with too much intelligence in their eyes, turn around and leave. Don't stop to investigate. Don't try to help. Don't listen to any sweet old voices that promise you food and shelter and rest. Just leave. Some gardens aren't meant for harvesting, and some prices are too high to pay. My name is James Crawford, but everyone calls me Jimmy. I've been a park ranger for 17 years now, working the George Washington National Forest in West Virginia. Most folks don't know that part of my job involves checking old mine shafts for safety hazards. See, this whole area used to be coal country. My grandfather worked these mines back in the 30s. My father did too, until he got smart and took a job with the Forest Service instead. I never believed the old stories about mine spirits. Thought they were just tales the old-timers told to keep people away from dangerous places. Methane gas can make you see things that aren't there, you know. Makes sense that trapped miners might hallucinate before they died. But that was before March of 1971, before the Black Rock mine. The call came in on a Tuesday morning, cold and wet from the spring thaw. 3 college kids had gone spelunking in the old mines over the weekend. They were supposed to be back Sunday night. When they didn't show up at their dorm, their roommates called the sheriff. The sheriff called us. "Jimmy, we got a problem. Chief Ranger Peterson said, standing in the doorway of my cabin. 3 kids missing in the Black Rock shaft. You know those tunnels better than anyone. I knew Black Rock all right. It was sealed up tight after the mine closed in '47. Before that, it had been the site of the worst mining disaster in the county's history. November 15th, 1934, 23 men died in a methane explosion. 8 bodies were never recovered. My grandfather was one of them. Those kids shouldn't have been able to get inside, I said, pulling on my heavy jacket. We welded those entrances shut years ago. Well, they found a way. Their cars parked right at the old access road. I loaded my truck with rescue gear, rope, flashlights, emergency breathing equipment, a methane detector. The drive to Black Rock, it took 40 minutes on winding mountain roads. The whole time I kept thinking about what my grandmother used to say. That mine's got a hunger, Jimmy. It's not done taking Crawford men. I'd always thought she was just grieving. Now, driving through the gray morning mist with the mountain looming ahead, I wasn't so sure. The kids' car sat empty beside the rusted gate that blocked the old mine road. A blue Volkswagen van with college stickers on the back window. The keys were still in the ignition. I hiked up the muddy trail to the main entrance. The steel plate we'd welded over the opening 10 years ago had been pried loose. Fresh crowbar marks scratched the metal. The hole was just big enough for a person to squeeze through. I clicked on my flashlight and checked my methane detector. The needle jumped higher than it should have, then dropped back down. That was odd. Sealed mines usually didn't have gas fluctuations. "Hello?" I called into the darkness. "This is Park Service. Can anyone hear me?" My voice echoed back from deep underground. But there was something wrong with the echo. It sounded like it was coming from much further away than the tunnel should go. The temperature dropped as soon as I stepped inside. Not the gradual cool you'd expect underground, but a sudden chill that made me zip up my jacket. My breath came out in puffs of white vapor. That's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. There should have been bats roosting in the entrance. Every other sealed mine in the area had them. Big brown bats love the constant temperature and humidity. But this place was empty. Even the spiders seemed to avoid it. 20 feet in, my flashlight beam picked up footprints in the coal dust. 3 sets, like the kids had been walking single file. But there was something else. A 4th set of prints, older and deeper. Work boots with steel toes, the kind miners wore decades ago. The prints led deeper into the mountain, past the first support beams and into the main tunnel system. I'd been down here once before, during my first year as a ranger, just to make sure it was properly sealed. The tunnels branched off in several directions, connecting to other shafts that honeycombed the mountain. My radio crackled with static, then went dead. That wasn't unusual this deep underground. Rock interferes with radio signals. I followed the footprints for maybe 100 yards when my flashlight started to dim. Brand new batteries, but the beam was getting weaker. I tapped it against my palm and the light flickered back to full strength. That's when I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of a pickaxe hitting rock, echoing from somewhere deep in the mine. Slow and steady, like someone working a coal seam. But that was impossible. These tunnels had been abandoned for over 20 years. I stopped and listened hard. The pickaxe sound continued, regular as a heartbeat. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the direction the footprints led, deeper into the mountain where the tunnels split off toward the old work areas. "Hello!" I shouted. "Is someone there?" The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound had been. It was the kind of quiet that presses against your ears, heavy and unnatural. Even dripping water makes noise in a mine, but I couldn't hear anything at all. I forced myself to keep following the footprints. The tunnel curved to the right, then opened into a wider chamber where the miners used to load coal cars. My light swept across rusted rails and rotting timber supports. There, sitting on the old loading platform, were 3 backpacks. College textbooks spilled out of one. A water bottle, some granola bars, and a camera from another. The third held climbing gear, ropes, carabiners, headlamps, but no sign of the kids who'd carried them here. I picked up the camera and scrolled through the pictures. The last few shots showed 3 young people grinning at the camera. A blonde girl, 2 guys with shaggy hair. They looked excited, like they were on some kind of adventure. The final picture made my blood run cold. It showed this same chamber, but it wasn't empty like it was now. In the photograph, the loading platform was crowded with men in mining gear. Hard hats, coveralls, pickaxes, and shovels. They were all staring straight at the camera with pale, hollow eyes. I looked up from the camera screen to the empty platform. Nothing there but dust and shadows. My hands shook as I scrolled back through the photos. The miners appeared in the last 5 pictures, getting clearer and more numerous in each one. In the earliest photo, they were just shadows at the edge of the frame. By the end, they filled the entire shot. 23 men. I counted them twice, the same number that died in the 1934 disaster. A cold draft touched the back of my neck. I spun around but saw only the empty tunnel behind me. My flashlight beam wavered like the bulb was dying, even though it had been fine a minute ago. That's when I noticed the coal dust, fresh coal dust, scattered across the floor in front of the loading platform. But this mine had been closed for decades. The coal seams were played out, the machinery removed. There shouldn't have been any fresh dust. I knelt down and touched it. The black powder was still warm. Somewhere in the depths of the mine, the pickaxe sound started again. But now there were multiple tools working. The steady rhythm of men digging, just like my grandfather had described from his working days. This isn't real, I whispered to myself. Gas leak. Has to be. But my methane detector wasn't showing dangerous levels. Just that odd flickering I'd noticed at the entrance. I had to find those kids. Whatever was happening here, they were probably scared and lost. Maybe the gas was affecting their minds too, making them see things. The footprints continued past, at the loading platform, toward a tunnel marked Shaft 7. I'd never been down that way before. During my previous inspection, it had been blocked by a cave-in. Now the passage was clear. The tunnel sloped downward at a steep angle. Water dripped from the ceiling, and the air got colder with every step. My light picked out fresh tool marks in the walls, like someone had been widening the passage recently. After what felt like a quarter-mile of walking, the tunnel opened into another work chamber. This one was smaller, with coal seams visible in the walls. And there, arranged in a neat line against the far wall, were 3 more sets of mining tools, brand new tools, pickaxes, shovels, and coal buckets, all clean and sharp like they'd just come from the company store. Next to them sat 3 mining helmets with fresh carbide lamps. They were exactly the right size for the missing college students. I backed away from the tools, my heart pounding. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. Those tools hadn't been here 24 hours ago. I was sure of it. A voice echoed from deeper in the mine. Male, young, scared. "Help me, please. I can't find my way out." It was coming from a tunnel I hadn't noticed before, one that seemed to disappear into solid darkness despite my flashlight. "Hold on," I shouted back. "Keep talking so I can find you." But when I started toward the voice, something made me stop. The footprints in the coal dust, they didn't lead toward that tunnel. They continued straight ahead, toward the deepest parts of the mine, and the voice calling for help was coming from the wrong direction. I stood there in that cold chamber, torn between following the voice and following the tracks. Every instinct I'd developed in 17 years of rescue work said to go toward the voice. But something deeper, some warning that came from generations of mining blood, told me the voice was wrong. I chose to follow the footprints. The tunnel ahead was narrow and low, forcing me to duck my head. Water ran along the floor, ice cold against my boots. The methane detector on my belt started clicking faster. Not dangerous yet, but climbing. After 50 yards, the tunnel opened into the biggest chamber I'd seen yet. This had to be one of the main work areas from the mine's active days. Coal seams ran along the walls in thick black veins. Wooden support posts, gray with age, held up the ceiling. And there, scattered around the chamber floor, were the bones. Human bones, yellowed with age. Skulls still wearing the metal bands from mining helmets. Rib cages with suspender buckles still attached. These had to be the 8 miners who were never recovered from the 1934 disaster. But they weren't just scattered randomly. Someone had arranged them carefully, respectfully. The skeletons were positioned at different workstations around the chamber, as if they were still on the job. One sat by a coal cart with a shovel in his bony hands. Another was positioned at what looked like a drilling station. The college kids were there too. Kevin, Amanda, and Brad. I'd gotten their names from the missing persons report. They were sitting at their own workstations, very much alive but working with the same steady rhythm I'd been hearing. Kevin swung a pickaxe at the coal face. Amanda shoveled loose coal into a cart. Brad operated an old hand drill. They were all covered in coal dust from head to toe, their modern clothes black with grime. Their eyes stared straight ahead, unblinking, focused completely on their work. "Hey!" I shouted. "Kids! What are you doing?" None of them looked at me. They just kept working with mechanical precision. The sound echoed off the chamber walls, pick, shovel, drill, pick, shovel, drill. I ran over to Kevin, who was closest. "Son, you need to get out of here. This place isn't safe." He didn't acknowledge me at all. I grabbed his shoulder and tried to turn him around. His skin was ice cold through his shirt. And when I find Ellie got him to face me. I saw why he wasn't responding. His eyes were completely white. No iris, no pupil. Just blank white like milk glass. All three kids had the same empty white eyes. "Oh, God," I whispered. "What happened to you?" That's when I heard the voice behind me. Old, rough, with the accent my grandfather used to have. "They're good workers, these young ones. Learn fast." I spun around. An old man in mining gear stood near the chamber entrance. His face was covered in coal dust, but I could see the family resemblance in his features. He had the same nose as my father, the same stubborn jaw. "Grandpa Ezra?" My voice came out as a croak. He smiled, showing teeth yellowed with age and coal dust. "Figured you'd recognize me, Jimmy boy. You got the Crawford look about you." This couldn't be real. My grandfather had been dead for 37 years, but there he was, solid as life, holding a mining pick like he'd never stopped working. "The company's got a new job for us," he said. "Coal seam runs deep here, deeper than we thought. Plenty of work for everyone." "Grandpa, you're dead. You died in the explosion." He looked confused for a moment, like he was trying to remember something important. Then his expression cleared. "Explosion? No, that's not right. We just got a little turned around in the tunnels. Been working our way back to the surface ever since. Should reach it any day now." I looked around the chamber. All the skeleton workers had turned to look at us. Their empty eye sockets seemed to glow with the same milky white light as the college kids' eyes. "These people need help," I said. "They need to get to a hospital." "They're past needing help," my grandfather said. "Just like you will be soon. The mine's been waiting for another Crawford. Family's got an obligation to finish the job." Two of the skeleton miners stood up from their workstations. They moved stiffly, joints creaking like old leather, but they moved. One picked up a length of heavy chain. The other hefted a sledgehammer. "Now don't make this harder than it has to be, Jitch. Am I? Your grandmother's been asking about you. She's down in the lower tunnels with the other wives. They've got a nice little community going down there." The temperature in the chamber dropped even further. My breath came out in thick clouds, and frost started forming on the metal parts of my equipment. I backed toward what looked like another tunnel entrance. "I'm leaving, and I'm taking these kids with me." "I don't think so." My grandfather raised his pickaxe, and suddenly all the dead miners were moving. Rising from their workstations, picking up tools, surrounding me in a slow circle. The college kids kept working, oblivious to everything happening around them. I ran. I sprinted down the first tunnel I could find, my flashlight beam jumping wildly ahead of me. Behind me I could hear them coming, not running. Dead things don't run, but moving with horrible purpose, metal tools scraping against stone walls. The tunnel branched off in 3 directions. I took the middle path, hoping it would lead back toward the surface. But after 100 yards, it curved downward instead, deeper into the mountain. My radio crackled with static, then cleared up enough for me to hear a voice. "Jimmy, this is Dale Morrison. I'm at the mine entrance. Where are you?" Dale was a mine safety engineer from the county office. He must have gotten the call about the missing kids. "Dale!" I gasped into the radio. "Don't come down here. It's not safe." "Jimmy, your voice is breaking up. I'm coming down to find you." "No! Stay out!" But the radio went dead again. I kept running, taking random turns whenever the tunnel branched. The footsteps behind me were getting closer. I could hear my grandfather's voice echoing through the passages. "Jimmy boy, you can't run from family responsibility. The mine's got a claim on Crawford men." The tunnel I was in opened into a huge natural cave. My flashlight couldn't reach the far walls. Somewhere in the darkness, water dripped into an underground pool. And sitting by that pool, like they were taking a work break, were more miners. These weren't skeletons. They looked fresh, like they'd died yesterday instead of decades ago. I recognized some of them from old photographs my grandmother had shown me. Men who'd worked with my grandfather who'd died in the same explosion. But they weren't alone. There were miners from other disasters too. Different eras, different clothing styles. Some wore the gear of the 1920s. Others had equipment from the 1940s. A few even looked like they might be from more recent times. All of them had the same milky white eyes as the college kids. "Welcome to the deep shift," one of them said. He was young, maybe 25, with a broken neck that made his head sit at an odd angle. "We've been waiting for you to join us." "The work never stops down here," said another. "Company's got quotas to meet." I backed toward what looked like another tunnel entrance, but found my way blocked by two more miners. They'd come from the passage I'd just used, no way out behind me. "Where's Dale Morrison?" I asked. "The engineer who was coming down." "Oh, he's already working," the young miner said. "Fast learner. Took to it real quick once we explained the situation." From somewhere in the cave's darkness came the familiar sound of pickaxe on stone, steady and rhythmic. "Dale!" I shouted. "Dale, can you hear me?" The sound stopped for a moment, then resumed. But now I could hear something else mixed in with it, a voice crying. "Help me!" it sobbed. I can't stop working." It was Dale's voice. I made a break for the tunnel on my right, pushing past the dead miners. They were surprisingly solid for spirits, but slow. I managed to slip through their circle and run for the darkness. The tunnel sloped upward. Maybe it really did lead to the surface. My legs burned from running, and my lungs felt like they were freezing with every breath of the cold mine air after what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. I saw something that made my heart leap. A faint glow ahead, like sunlight filtering through a crack. But when I reached it, I found something impossible. I was back in the first chamber where I'd found the college kids' backpacks, but now it was full of miners, all working busily. Some I recognized as the skeletons from the deep chamber. Others were the fresher corpses from the cave. And there, swinging a pickaxe with mechanical precision, was Dale Morrison. His safety engineer's uniform was already black with coal dust. His eyes had turned that horrible milky white. "Dale!" I grabbed his arm. He turned to look at me, and for just a moment his eyes cleared. The normal brown color flickered back. "Jimmy," he whispered, Don't let them make you work. Once you start, you can't stop. You forget you're supposed to leave." Then the white clouded his eyes again, and he went back to his mindless digging. My grandfather appeared beside me. "See how easy it is? No pain, no worry about bills or family troubles. Just good, honest work forever." "Forever? The mine takes care of its own, Jimmy. Company's got a pension plan you wouldn't believe." I looked around the chamber. Dozens of dead miners, all working with the same empty dedication. All trapped in this underground hell, thinking they were still alive and employed. "What about the explosion?" I asked. "Don't you remember dying?" For a moment, confusion flickered across my grandfather's face. "Explosion." There was light. And heat. And then... He shook his head. "No, that was just a gas leak. Made us dizzy for a while. We kept working." That's when I understood. The blast had killed them so suddenly they never realized they were dead. They'd been working down here for 37 years, thinking they were still earning wages to feed families that had long sin, buried empty coffins. The other miners had suffered the same fate in different disasters, all of them trapped by their own dedication to the job that killed them. "I'm not staying," he said, "and I'm taking Dale and those kids with me." My grandfather's face went dark. I'm afraid that's not your choice anymore, Jimmy. You breathed the mine air, walked the deep tunnels. The mountain's got a claim on you now. The temperature plunged so fast that ice crystals formed on my jacket. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving only the pale glow from the miner's eyes. But in that ghostly light, I saw something that gave me hope. Carved into the stone wall behind my grandfather was a Christian cross. Someone had scratched it there decades ago, probably during the original mining days. My grandmother had been a devout woman. She'd made sure I knew my prayers, even when I'd stopped believing in much of anything. Our Father, who art in heaven, I began. The miners stopped working. They turned to stare at me with those awful white eyes. Hallowed be thy name. My grandfather backed away. Jimmy, stop that foolishness. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. The dead miners began to flicker. Like bad television reception, I could see through them to the chamber walls. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses. Some of the newer spirits were fading completely. Dale Morrison stumbled, his pickaxe falling from his hands. The white cleared from his eyes. As we forgive those who trespass against us. Jimmy, Dale gasped. What's happening? Where are we? And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. My grandfather let out a wail of anguish. The work. We have to finish the work. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. The mine spirits vanished like smoke, but the mountain itself groaned in anger. The ceiling started to crack. Chunks of stone crashed down around us as the ancient support beams creaked and swayed, without the supernatural force holding it too. Together, the mine was remembering that it should have collapsed decades ago. Run! I grabbed Dale's arm and pulled him toward the entrance tunnel. Behind us, the chamber filled with dust and falling rock. The sound was like thunder, echoing through all the connected passages. We stumbled through the darkness, following the main tunnel by feel. My dead flashlight was useless, but Dale had a backup that still worked, sort of. It flickered on and off, giving us glimpses of the path ahead. The college kids were stumbling along behind us. They'd snapped out of their trance when the spirits vanished. But they were confused and scared. Amanda kept asking where she was. Kevin couldn't remember how they'd gotten so deep underground. Just keep moving, I told them. Don't look back. The mine groaned around us like a living thing in pain. More ceiling chunks crashed down. At one point, we had to crawl under a support beam that had fallen across our path. But we could feel fresh air now, flowing toward us from the entrance. Cold mountain air that smelled like pine trees and freedom. When we finally saw daylight filtering through the entrance hole, I almost cried with relief. We squeezed through the gap in the steel plate and stood blinking in the afternoon sun. It was still the same day, though it felt like we'd been underground for years. Dale's truck was parked next to mine. The college kids' van sat where they'd left it, keys still in the ignition. What happened down there? Kevin asked. His face was pale under the coal dust. I remember going into the mine to explore, but after that, it's all fuzzy. Gas leak, I said. Made you hallucinate. Made us all hallucinate. Dale nodded slowly. That's right. Methane can cause all kinds of mental effects. But I caught his eye, and I could tell he remembered more than he was letting on. You don't forget the feeling of being trapped. Ped in your own body, forced to work for eternity. We drove the kids back to town and took them to the hospital to get checked out. Coal dust in the lungs can cause problems. The doctors found some minor respiratory irritation, but nothing serious. The official report blamed everything on methane exposure and old mining equipment that had somehow reactivated. The college kids had wandered deep into the mine in a confused state, and we'd rescued them just before a partial tunnel collapse. Nobody mentioned the spirits. Nobody talked about miners who'd been dead for decades. 3 days later, county workers came with welding equipment and sealed the Black Rock mine permanently. Not just a steel plate this time, but concrete and steel bars, a barrier that would take heavy machinery to break through. I requested a transfer to surface duties only. No more underground rescue work. My supervisor understood. Too many years crawling around in dark, dangerous places can get to a man. But late at night, when the wind blows through the mountains just right, I can still hear them sometimes. The sound of pickaxes on stone, echoing up from deep underground. The mine spirits, still working their eternal shift in the depths below. And I know that someday, when they're desperate enough for workers, they'll find another way to the surface. Dale Morrison quit his job with the county and moved to Florida. He sends me a Christmas card every year, but we never talk about what really happened in the Black Rock mine. The college kids graduated and went on with their lives. Sometimes I wonder if they have dreams about working in the dark, but I've never asked. As for me, My name is Daniel McAllister, but everyone calls me Danny. I've been a ranger in Jefferson National Forest for 12 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these Virginia mountains could throw at me. Bears, wildcats, the occasional crazy hiker who thinks they can survive on berries and good intentions. But I was wrong about seeing everything. Dead wrong. I became a ranger after my veterinary practice went south. One bad call during surgery, one lawsuit, and suddenly I couldn't stomach looking at blood anymore. Funny thing is, working with wildlife helped me get over that fear. Animals don't judge you when your hands shake a little. They just need you to do your job. October 1985 was unseasonably warm. The drought had been going on for 3 months, and it was making the animals act strange. They were desperate for water, clustering around the few creeks that still ran strong. That's what brought me to Blood Creek Hollow in the first place. The hollow sits 22 miles from the nearest road, tucked deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains, where most folks never venture. It's a beautiful place, or it should be. A creek runs through it year-round, crystal clear water tumbling over smooth rocks. Dense rhododendron thickets create natural tunnels, and the whole area feels like a cathedral made of green leaves and mountain stone. But something was wrong there. Had been for weeks. I'd gotten 3 calls about deer in the area. Not normal calls about crop damage or traffic accidents. These were different. Hikers finding deer carcasses that looked like they'd been drained dry. No obvious cause of death. No feeding damage. Just dead deer that looked like empty shells. As the wildlife disease specialist for this sector, it was my job to figure out what was killing them. Could be hemorrhagic disease, maybe a new strain we hadn't seen before. Could be vampire bats expanding or range north, though that would be a first. Whatever it was, I needed samples. I packed my gear on a Tuesday morning, my Leica binoculars, field necropsy kit, sample containers, and a Reconyx trail camera to monitor the area overnight. The hike into Blood Creek Hollow takes about 4 hours if you know the trails. I knew them. The first thing that hit me was the silence. I'd been in these mountains for over a decade, and they're never quiet. There's always something making noise. Birds calling, squirrels chattering, insects buzzing. But as I got closer to the hollow, all of that just stopped. The only sound was my boots crunching on dry leaves and my own breathing. It felt wrong, like the forest was holding its breath. I found the first deer carcass about 100 yards from the creek. A healthy doe, maybe 3 years old, lying on her side like she'd just laid down for a nap and never woken up. But when I knelt down to examine her, my stomach dropped. She'd been drained completely. Her blood was gone, but there were no obvious wounds except for 2 small puncture marks on her neck. The marks were precise, almost surgical. No tearing, no mess. Just 2 neat holes that went straight to the jugular vein. I'd never seen anything like it in 12 years of wildlife work. I took photos, collected tissue samples, and marked the location on my GPS. Professional protocol. Do the job, document everything, try not to think about how a deer ends up looking like an empty balloon. But as I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I set up my trail camera on a game trail near the creek, about 50 yards from where I'd found the first deer. The battery was fresh, memory card empty. I'd positioned hundreds of these cameras over the years. This was routine. Except nothing about Blood Creek Hollow felt routine. I made camp that night about a quarter to a mile upstream, close enough to monitor the area, but far enough to avoid spooking whatever might be out there. As darkness fell, the silence got worse. I've spent countless nights alone in these mountains, and I've never been afraid of the dark. But that night, every shadow seemed to move wrong. Around midnight, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It started as a low growling so deep it was almost below the range of hearing. Like a big cat, but bigger than any mountain lion I'd ever encountered. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the hollow walls until I couldn't tell which direction it was coming from. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam across the trees. Nothing, just darkness and the pale trunks of birch trees reflecting the light like bones. The growling stopped as suddenly as it had started. I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I hiked back to check my trail camera. The first thing I noticed was that the LED indicator was dark. Dead battery. That was impossible. I'd installed a fresh lithium pack that should have lasted 2 weeks. When I pulled the memory card and checked it on my camera's preview screen, there were only 3 photos. All taken within the first hour after I'd set it up. After that, nothing. But those 3 photos made my hands shake. The first showed the empty game trail at dusk. The second, taken an hour later, showed a pair of yellow eyes reflecting the camera's flash. They were positioned about 4 feet off the ground, spaced too wide to be a bobcat, too high to be a raccoon. The third photo was the one that made me question my sanity. It showed a shadow moving across the trail. But the shadow was moving against the light source. That's impossible. Shadows don't work that way. They can't move independently of what's casting them. I packed up my camp and hiked back toward the deer carcass, trying to think like a scientist instead of prey. There had to be a logical explanation. Equipment malfunction, maybe a reflection creating optical illusion. I'd seen plenty of strange things in PH. Otos that had mundane explanations, but when I reached the site where I'd found the first deer, I found something that killed my scientific rationality. There were tracks in the soft earth near the carcass, large cat tracks, but wrong in every way that mattered. They were 6 inches across, bigger than any mountain lion print I'd ever seen, but the front tracks had something that made my veterinary training scream warnings: thumb impressions. Whatever made these tracks had opposable thumbs. I knelt down and measured them carefully, took photographs from every angle. The prints were fresh, probably made during the night while I'd been lying awake listening to that impossible growling. They led from the deer carcass toward a dense thicket of mountain laurel, then disappeared on rocky ground. I followed the trail as far as I could, pushing through undergrowth so thick it blocked out most of the sunlight. The laurel created natural tunnels, winding passages that felt more like caves than forest. My flashlight beam couldn't penetrate more than a few feet ahead. That's when I found the second deer. This one was a buck, 8 points, easily 200 pounds. He was hung upside down from a low branch, suspended by twisted vines wrapped around his hind legs, completely drained, just like the doe, but the positioning was deliberate, intentional. No animal hangs its prey like that. Animals don't have the intelligence or dexterity to tie knots with vines, but something had. As I stood there staring at the suspended deer, trying to process what I was seeing, I heard movement in the laurel thicket behind me. Slow, deliberate footsteps that seemed too heavy for any normal forest animal. I turned around slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. Yellow eyes were watching me from the shadows, about 30 feet away. They didn't blink. They didn't move. They just watched with an intelligence that made every instinct in my body scream, run. But I couldn't move. Those eyes held me like I was hypnotized, like I was prey caught in headlights. I could hear my own breathing, loud and fast, but I felt disconnected from my body. The eyes moved closer, not walking closer, gliding, like they were floating through the dense undergrowth without disturbing a single branch. That broke the spell. I stumbled backward, crashed through the laurel thicket, and ran toward the creek like my life depended on it, because I was pretty sure it did. I didn't stop running until I reached the creek. Something about the flowing water felt safer, though I couldn't explain why. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely operate my satellite radio. Base, this is McAllister. I need backup at Blood Creek Hollow. We've got a situation. Copy, Danny. What kind of situation? Unknown predator. Large cat, possibly escaped exotic. I need Dr. Garrett out here with the mobile lab unit. Copy. Dr. Garrett is en route. ETA 3 hours. Dr. Lisa Garrett was the park veterinarian, one of the few people who took my disease investigation seriously. If anyone could help me make sense of what I'd seen, it would be her. I just had to survive until she arrived. I spent the next 3 hours documenting everything I could from the relative safety of the creek bank. More photos, detailed measurements, GPS coordinates for both deer carcasses. Professional protocol kept my mind busy and my hands from shaking. But the feeling of being watched never went away. Lisa arrived just after noon, hiking in with a backpack full of lab equipment and a skeptical expression that I knew too well. "Danny, you look like hell. When's the last time you slept?" "Not important. Lisa, I need you to look at these carcasses. Something's out here, and it's not any predator I've ever seen." I led her to the first deer, then to the suspended buck in the laurel thicket, watched her professional composure crack as she examined the evidence. "These puncture wounds," she said, probing the neck wounds with a sterile probe. "They're too precise for any natural predator. Look at this. They go straight to the carotid artery with surgical accuracy. What about the blood loss?" "Complete exsanguination. But there's no evidence of feeding. Whatever did this drained the blood and left everything else untouched." She collected blood samples from the puncture sites, tissue samples from the organs, everything by the book. But I could see the questions in her eyes that she wasn't ready to voice. "Lisa, there's something else. I found tracks." I showed her the prints with the thumb impressions, watched her scientific worldview struggle with evidence that shouldn't exist. "This has to be some kind of hoax," she said finally. "Someone's messing with you, Danny. These can't be real." That's when we heard the screaming. Human screaming, coming from downstream. A man's voice, then a woman's, both crying for help with the kind of terror that cuts through your bones. We ran toward the sound, following the creek as it curved around a bend, found a campsite set up on a small beach of river stones, two-person tent, properly hung food bags, all the signs of experienced backpackers who knew what they were doing. The tent was undamaged, no signs of struggle. But Mark and Jennifer Walsh were dead inside their sleeping bags, and they looked exactly like the deer, drained, empty, 2 precise puncture wounds on each of their necks. Lisa knelt beside the bodies, checking for pulse signs she knew she wouldn't find. "Danny, this is impossible. No animal could do this to humans without leaving more evidence. Where's the blood? Where are the struggle signs?" "They died in their sleep," I said, though saying it out loud made it sound even more impossible. "That's not how predator attacks work. Prey fights back. There should be defensive wounds, torn fabric, disturbed ground." But there wasn't any of that. Just 2 dead campers who looked like they'd gone to sleep and been quietly murdered by something that drank their blood like wine. Lisa was taking photos when the sun disappeared behind clouds. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many seconds, and that oppressive silence fell over the hollow like a blanket. "We need to get out of here," I said. "Now." "Danny, we can't leave a crime scene. We need to call this in, wait for the coroner." "Lisa, listen to me. Whatever killed those deer is still out here. It killed these people, and it's been watching us since you arrived." She looked up from her camera. "Watching us? Danny, you're starting to scare me." That's when we saw the eyes. They were positioned in the trees around the campsite, not one pair. Dozens. Yellow eyes reflecting what little daylight filtered through the clouds, all focused on us with that same terrible intelligence. "Oh God," Lisa whispered. "What are they?" "We need to reach the water," I said. "Stay close to me. Don't make sudden movements." We backed toward the creek, keeping our eyes on the trees. The yellow eyes followed our movement but didn't come closer. It was like they were herding us, pushing us in a specific direction. We reached the creek bank just as the sun broke through the clouds again. The eyes vanished as suddenly as they'd appeared, but I could feel the presence still there, waiting in the shadows. "Did you see that?" Lisa asked. "All those eyes. That's not possible. No animal travels in groups like that with coordinated behavior." I was about to answer when something moved in my peripheral vision. Something large and dark, flowing through the trees like liquid shadow. "Lisa, don't move. Don't look directly at it." But she was already turning, her scientific curiosity overriding her survival instincts. The thing that stepped out of the laurel thicket was 6 feet long and built like a mountain lion, but wrong in every detail. Its head was too large, its front paws had fingers instead of claws, and those yellow eyes held an intelligence that was entirely human. "What head is that?" Lisa whispered. I remembered my grandfather's stories about the old country, about things that wore animal shapes but weren't animals. Cherokee legends I'd dismissed as superstition. "Wampus beast," I said. "It's a wampus beast." The creature's head tilted at the sound of the name, like it understood, like it was pleased to be recognized. That's when it looked directly at Lisa. The moment the creature's eyes met Lisa's, she went rigid. Not scared rigid, but paralyzed, like her muscles had forgotten how to work. Her camera fell from her hands and clattered on the rocky creek bank. "Lisa!" I grabbed her arm, tried to pull her away from those hypnotic yellow eyes. But she was locked in place, staring at the beast with a blank expression that terrified me more than the creature itself. The wampus beast moved closer, flowing through the undergrowth with impossible grace. Up close, I could see details that my mind struggled to process. Its fur was midnight black but seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its front paws, hands, really, had human-like fingers tipped with claws that could tear through steel. But it was the intelligence in those eyes that made my blood run cold. This wasn't an animal. It had been human once, long ago, before something went terribly wrong. "Lisa, fight it," I said. "Don't let it control you." But she couldn't hear me. The beast's gaze held her completely, and she was walking toward it with the slow, dreamlike movements of someone under hypnosis. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed my flashlight and shined the beam directly into those yellow eyes. The creature recoiled with a shriek that sounded like metal tearing. Lisa stumbled backward, shaking her head like someone waking from a dream. "Danny? What happened? I felt like I was floating." "We need to move. Now." The beast was recovering from the light blast, but I could see it gathering itself for another attempt at hypnosis. Or worse. I pulled Lisa toward the creek. "Stay in the water. Don't let it get between us and the running water." "Why the water?" "Old stories my grandfather told me. Cherokee legends. These things can't cross running water." We splashed into Blood Creek, the cold mountain water shocking us both fully alert. The beast followed us to the bank, but stopped at the water's edge, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "It's working," Lisa whispered. "It won't come into the water." But our relief was short-lived. The creek was only 30 feet wide, and the beast was intelligent. It was already moving upstream, looking for a place to cross. We had maybe 5 minutes before it found a fallen log or shallow crossing. "The campers' backpacks," I said. "They might have something we can use." We waded back to the campsite, staying in the water as much as possible. The beast shadowed our movements from the bank, its yellow eyes never leaving us. Mark Walsh's pack had everything a smart backpacker carries: water purification tablets, first aid kit, emergency flare gun, and, thank God, a battery-powered lantern with fresh batteries. "Danny, look at this," Lisa said. She was examining Jennifer's pack. She was researching Cherokee folklore. "Look." She held up a notebook filled with handwritten notes about wampus beast legends, stories about medicine women who used blood magic and became corrupted, trapped between human and animal form, tales of creatures that hunted by night and fed on the life force of their victims, and instructions for traditional protection methods. "Mountain ashwood," I read over her shoulder. "Running water, bright lights, and—" I stopped reading. "What?" "It says the creature is bound to the place where it first transformed. It can't leave this hollow. That means every camper who comes through here is in danger." The beast had found what it was looking for: a fallen pine tree that stretched across the creek about 50 yards upstream. It was already climbing onto the log, moving with the confident balance of something that had made this crossing many times before. The flare gun, I said. Lisa, give me the flare gun. She handed it over, and I checked the load. One flare, bright enough to light up the night sky, bright enough to hurt something that was vulnerable to artificial light. The beast was halfway across the log when I took aim and fired. The flare hit its center mass in an explosion of red light and burning phosphorus. The creature's shriek echoed off the hollow walls as it tumbled into the creek, thrashing in the water like it was on fire. But instead of drowning, it found its footing and stood up in the shallow water. The flare had burned patches of its fur away, revealing skin that looked almost human underneath. And it was angry, really angry. Run, I told Lisa. Follow the creek downstream. Don't stop until you reach the trail. What about you? Someone needs to document this. Someone needs to tell people what's really out here. The beast was moving toward us through the water, apparently no longer bound by the running water rule. Maybe the injury had changed something. Maybe I'd misunderstood the legend. Lisa squeezed my hand once, then turned and ran downstream, splashing through the creek as fast as she could move. The beast's head turned to track her movement, and I saw my chance. I clicked on the battery lantern and held it up like a weapon. Hey, over here! The creature's attention snapped back to me. In the bright LED light, I could see its true form clearly for the first time. It had been a woman once, probably Cherokee, probably centuries ago. The human features were still there, buried under the beast's transformation, but recognizable if you knew how to look. It, had been trapped in this form for longer than anyone alive could remember. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm sorry this happened to you. The beast tilted its head, and for just a moment I saw something almost human flicker in those yellow eyes. Pain, loneliness, a trapped soul begging for release. Then the moment passed, and it lunged at me with claws extended. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital in Roanoke. Lisa was sitting beside my bed, her left arm in a sling, and her face covered with scratches from running through the laurel thickets. What happened? I asked. You don't remember? I remembered the beast lunging at me. I remembered falling backward into the creek, the lantern flying from my hands. After that, nothing. I got help, Lisa said. Called in a search and rescue team. They found you unconscious by the creek with claw marks across your chest. 4 inches deep, another inch, and it would have gotten your heart. What about the creature? Lisa was quiet for a long moment. There was no creature, Danny. Just you, alone in the hollow, apparently mauled by a bear. That's not what happened. I know that. You know that. But that's what's going in the official report. The area's been closed for wildlife disease quarantine. No one's allowed in Blood Creek Hollow for the next 5 years. And the campers? Officially, they died from exposure after getting lost. The medical examiner found evidence of hypothermia. I stared at the ceiling, trying to process what she was telling me. They're covering it up. They're protecting people from something they can't understand or control. Lisa handed me a manila folder. But I kept the blood samples, had them analyzed at a private lab. I opened the folder and read the report. The blood from the puncture wounds contained an unknown anticoagulant compound, something that prevented clotting and kept blood flowing freely. The chemical structure didn't match anything in medical databases. There's more, Lisa said. I've been doing research. Similar cases reported in North Carolina, Tennessee, West Virginia, always in areas with Cherokee tribal history, always during times of environmental stress. How many people know the truth? You, me, and Joseph Crowfeather. Who? Cherokee elder I contacted after we got back. He's the one who told me about the mountain ash wood and the other protection methods. He's also the one who convinced the Forest Service to close the area. I looked down at the bandages covering my chest. 4 parallel scars that would mark me for the rest of my life. I can't go back to field work, I said. Every time I see blood now, I think about those empty deer, those dead campers. I know. I can't either. I've put in for a transfer to wildlife research. Lab work only. We sat in comfortable silence for a while. 2 people who had seen something that wasn't supposed to exist and survived to tell about it. Danny, there's one more thing. Joseph Crowfeather wants to meet with you when you're recovered. He says there are other places like Blood Creek Hollow, other areas where the old stories are still true. I thought about that yellow-eyed intelligence, trapped between human and animal for centuries. I thought about future campers who might stumble into that hollow before the 5-year closure expired. "Tell him I'll meet with him," I said. "Someone needs to know how to protect people from things like this." Lisa nodded and stood up to leave. At the door, she turned back. "Danny, do you think it's still out there?" I touched the bandages on my chest and remembered the pain in those ancient yellow eyes. "Yeah," I said, "it's still there. And it's still hungry." After she left, I lay in the dark hospital room and listened to the normal sounds of the modern world. Cars in the parking lot, televisions in other rooms, the hum of air conditioning. All of it felt thin and fragile compared to the primal reality of Blood Creek Hollow. Somewhere out there in the Virginia mountains, an ancient evil waited in the shadows, protected by official silence, hidden by bureaucratic cover-you. P.S. Free to hunt anyone unlucky enough to wander into its territory. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. Nothing except make sure the right people knew the truth, the Cherokees. Elders who remembered the old stories, the rangers who would come after me, the campers who deserved fair warning before they hiked into hell. My name is Daniel McAllister, and I used to be a wildlife disease specialist. Now I'm something else entirely. Now I'm someone who knows that the old stories are true. And that knowledge is going to haunt me for the rest of my life. My name is Robert McKenna, but everyone calls me Bobby. I've been fighting fires in these Tennessee mountains for 21 years now. My daddy did it before me, and his daddy before him. 3 generations of McKennas keeping these forests safe. Never believed in the old stories. You know the ones, demons in the woods, spirits that start fires. Always figured they were just ways to teach kids to be careful with matches. Fires dangerous enough without making up monsters. August 1989 was the worst drought I'd ever seen. The leaves were brown by midsummer. Every step in the woods sounded like walking on broken glass. We had the whole Cherokee National Forest on high alert. One spark could burn down half of Tennessee. I was stationed up on Devil's Backbone Ridge that month. Ugly name for a beautiful place, but fitting. The ridge runs north to south for about 12 miles, all rocky outcrops and dense timber. Gets hit by lightning more than anywhere else in the forest. Named after a big fire back in the 1800s that started when lightning struck the ridge during a dry spell just like this one. My job was simple. Watch for fires, report weather conditions, and keep hikers away from the dangerous areas. Had my fire weather station set up on the highest point, checking temperature and humidity every hour. The numbers weren't good. Humidity down to 8% some days, temperature hitting over 100 degrees, even in the shade. I'd been up there 2 weeks when the weird stuff started. First thing I noticed was the animals. They were all wrong. Deer that should have been bedding down in the cool hollows were running across open ridges in the middle of the day. Birds flying in circles like they couldn't find where they wanted to go. Even the insects were quiet, which never happens in August. Then my weather instruments started acting up. I was doing my morning readings when the temperature gauge spiked. Went from 96 degrees to 147 in about 3 seconds. Thought it was broken, so I reset it. Same thing happened an hour later, then again at noon. Called it in to my supervisor, Mike Rodriguez, down at the main station. "Bobby, you sure your equipment's working right?" Mike asked through the radio static. "Checked it 3 times, I told him. "Everything looks normal, then boom, temperature goes crazy for a few seconds, then back to normal. Might be getting interference from somewhere. Keep an eye on it." But it wasn't interference. The heat spikes were real. I could feel them, like opening an oven door when someone was standing 20 feet away. The air would shimmer and dance, then go back to normal. That afternoon I was walking my patrol route along the ridge when I found the first one. A fire scar. Perfect circle, maybe 8 feet across, burned right down to bare rock. But there was no lightning the night before, no campfires allowed, no power lines or equipment anywhere near it. I radioed it in and spent 2 hours going over every inch of that burned area, looking for cigarette butts, bottle glass that might focus sunlight, any sign of how it started. Nothing. just a perfect circle of ash and char. The next morning there were 3 more, all perfect circles, all in places where fire shouldn't be able to start. One was right in the middle of a creek bed where the ground was still damp. Another was on bare rock with no fuel to burn. Mike drove up that afternoon with Carol Windsor, our fire behavior analyst. Carol was smart as they come, had a degree in fire science, and could read burn patterns like most people read books. "This doesn't make sense," she said, crouched down next to one of the circles. "Look at the char patterns. This burned from the inside out, not from an ignition source." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Most fires start at one point and spread outward. These look like they started everywhere at once, like the ground just decided to catch fire." She set up her equipment and started taking measurements: soil temperature, char depth, chemical residue tests. After an hour, she stood up and shook her head. "Bobby, this is impossible. The ground temperature in the center of these burns is still over 300 degrees. They should have cooled off by now, and there's no chemical residue from accelerants." That night, we set up camp about a quarter-mile from the burn sites. Carol wanted to monitor them overnight, see if there was any pattern to when they appeared. I woke up around 2 in the morning to Carol shaking my shoulder. "Bobby, you need to see this." Outside our tent, the air was glowing. Not bright, just a soft orange light coming from the direction of the ridge. We grabbed our flashlights and headed toward it. The glow was coming from the burn sites. All 4 of them were glowing like coals in a fireplace. Not burning, not spreading, just glowing. "Have you ever seen anything like this?" I asked Carol. She was already setting up her camera. "Never. This violates everything I know about fire behavior." We watched for about an hour. The glow got brighter, then dimmer, like something breathing. Around 3:30 it stopped completely. In the morning we found 2 more burn circles. The next day, Carol brought in more equipment: heat sensors, infrared cameras, soil analysis kits. She was determined to figure out what was happening. "There has to be a scientific explanation," she kept saying. "Fire doesn't just appear out of nowhere." But I was starting to wonder if she was wrong. I'd been thinking about the stories my grandfather used to tell. He worked these mountains back in the 1940s, before modern fire equipment. Used to talk about fires that moved against the wind, that started in places where fire couldn't possibly start. Just old-timer stories, my dad always said, before we understood fire science. But Stan, ding there, looking at those impossible burn circles, I wondered if the old-timers knew something we didn't. That afternoon, while Carol was running tests, I hiked down to the Cherokee Reservation boundary, found an old man named Joseph Burning Wolf sitting on his porch, working on a basket. "Mr. Burning Wolf, you know anything about fires up on Devil's Backbone?" He looked up at me with eyes that seemed older than the mountains. "You the ranger having trouble up there?" "How did you know that?" "Word travels. My grandfather used to tell stories about that ridge. Said it was a bad place to go when the rain stopped coming." "What kind of stories?" Joseph set down his basket and looked toward the ridge. "Fire spirit lives up there. Been there longer than anyone can remember. Most of the time it sleeps. But when the forest gets too dry, when there's too much dead wood and not enough rain, it wakes up hungry." "You mean like a forest fire?" "No, I mean like a living thing that eats fire. That makes fire. My grandfather's grandfather used to do ceremonies up there, keep it sleeping. But nobody's done those ceremonies in over 100 years. I wanted to laugh, but something about the way he said it made me listen instead. "What did these ceremonies involve?" "Controlled burns, sacred fires, offerings of tobacco and sweetgrass, ways to feed the spirit without letting it get too strong." He looked at me seriously. "White man's firefighting is backwards. You try to stop all fires so the forest builds up fuel like kindling. When the spirit wakes up, it has more to eat than ever before." I thanked him and hiked back up to camp. Found Carol standing next to her equipment with a confused look on her face. "Bobby, I'm getting readings that don't make sense. The heat signatures are moving." "What do you mean, moving?" She showed me the infrared display. "Look at this. The hot side. Pots aren't staying in the same place. They're spreading out from the original burn sites, but in perfect straight lines. On the screen, I could see lines of heat stretching out from each burn circle like spokes on a wheel. They were heading toward the driest parts of the ridge, where the timber was thickest. "It's like something's planning where to burn next," Carol said. That's when I saw it. Standing about 50 yards away at the edge of the tree line was a shape that didn't belong. At first I thought it was just heat shimmer rising from the ground, but it was too tall, too steady. "Carol, look over there. Do you see that?" She raised her binoculars. "See what?" But when I looked again, it was gone. That night, the glow came back stronger than before. We could see it from our camp without getting up. Carol was taking pictures every few minutes, documenting everything. Around midnight, she grabbed my arm. "Bobby, the temperature just jumped to 200 degrees on my sensors, but look outside, there's no visible fire." I unzipped the tent flap. The air was hot enough to make me step back, like opening the door to a blast furnace, but I couldn't see any flames. Then I heard the sound. It was like wood crackling in a fireplace, but louder, much louder, like a whole forest burning, but there was no smoke, no visible fire. "We need to get out of here," I said. Carol was still taking readings. "Just a few more minutes. This is incredible data." That's when the shape appeared again, this time much closer. It was about 8 feet tall and roughly human-shaped, but made of what looked like living fire. Not flames exactly, more like the air above a hot road in summer, but solid somehow. Where its eyes should have been were 2 spots of absolute darkness, like looking into deep wells. It stood there for maybe 10 seconds, then started walking toward us. "Carol, we need to go. Now." She finally looked up from her equipment and saw it too. The camera fell from her hands. "That's impossible," she whispered. The thing stopped about 20 feet away. I could feel heat radiating from it, like standing next to a bonfire. It seemed to be studying us, tilting its head like it was trying to figure out what we were. Then it raised one arm, and every dead tree within 100 yards burst into flame at the same time. We ran. We made it back to the road, but just barely. The fire chased us down the ridge, moving faster than any wildfire should move. By the time we reached my truck, half the ridge was burning. I called in the fire, and within an hour we had crews heading up from 3 different stations. Helicopters, ground crews, the whole works. But when they got there, the fire was gone. Not burned out, gone. Like it had never happened. "Bobby, where's the fire?" Mike asked over the radio. "We've got 20 men up here, and there's no sign of any burn." Carol and I hiked back up with the crew. The burn circles were still there, but all the trees that had exploded into flame were standing normal and green, like nothing had happened. "Must have been a trick of the light," one of the crew members said. "Moonlight and heat shimmer can look like fire from a distance." But Carol and I knew what we'd seen, and we had the photos to prove it. Except when Carol developed the film, half the pictures showed normal forest. The other half showed something that made my blood go cold. In every photo where the fire creature appeared, the trees behind it were burning. But in the next shot, taken just seconds later, the same trees were normal. Like the fire existed in one moment, but not the next. "This is scientifically impossible," Carol kept saying. "Fire can't just appear and disappear." But it was happening whether science could explain it or not. Over the next 3 days, the burn circles multiplied. By the end of the week, there were over 30 of them scattered across the ridge, each one perfectly round, each one still radiating heat days after they appeared. And the thing was getting bolder. I started seeing it during the day, always at the edge of my vision, standing in shadows or behind trees. When I looked directly at it, it would fade away like smoke, but I knew it was watching me. Carol was getting obsessed with figuring it out. She brought in more equipment, started camping up there every night. I tried to talk her out of it, but she was convinced she could find a scientific explanation. "There's no such thing as fire demons, Bobby. There has to be a natural cause." On the 4th night, she found out how wrong she was. I was down at the main station filing reports and trying to convince my supervisors that we needed to close the ridge completely. Carol was up on Devil's Backbone with her equipment, monitoring the heat patterns. Around 2 in the morning, I got a radio call. "Bobby, this is Carol. I'm seeing massive temperature spikes, over 400 degrees and rising." Get out of there, Carol. Head down to the road. Wait, I'm getting readings like nothing I've ever seen. The heat source is moving toward me, but there's no visible fire. It's like a wall of superheated air. Carol, leave the equipment and get out, now. Hold on, I can see something. Oh my God, Bobby. It's walking toward me. There's something walking toward me made of fire. Then the radio went silent. I jumped in my truck and drove up to the ridge as fast as I could. Found Carol's equipment scattered around her campsite, but no sign of her. Then I saw the glow. It was coming from about a quarter-mile up the ridge. Bright orange light flickering through the trees. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward it. I found Carol in a clearing surrounded by a perfect circle of burned ground. She was sitting in the center of the circle, completely still. "Carol," I called out, but she didn't respond. I ran toward her, but stopped when I got close enough to see her clearly. She was burned. Not on the outside, her clothes weren't even singed, but I could see through her skin to the fire burning inside her body. Her bones glowed like coals. Her blood looked like lava flowing through glass tubes. She turned toward me and tried to speak, but what came out was the sound of wood crackling in a fireplace. Then she collapsed and all the light went out of her. When the sunrise came, I found her body. The coroner said later that she had burned to death from the inside out. Her organs were completely charred, but her skin was untouched. There was no scientific explanation for what had killed Carol Windsor. I knew I couldn't handle this alone anymore. That afternoon, I drove back down to see Joseph Burning Wolf. "It killed her," I told him. "That thing up on the ridge killed Carol." Joseph nodded sadly. "Fire spirit's been sleeping too long. It's hungry now and angry. Your friend got too close. How do I stop it?" "You can't stop it. But maybe you can make it go back to sleep." "How?" Joseph stood up and walked to an old wooden chest. He pulled out several bundles of dried plants and a small carved pipe. Tobacco, sweet grass, sage. Things my grandfather used in the old ceremonies. The spirit needs to be fed, but the right way. Not with destroying fire, with sacred fire. "I don't know how to do any ceremonies. I'll teach you what I remember. But you have to understand this is dangerous. The spirit might not want to listen. It's been awake for weeks now, getting stronger every day." That evening, Joseph came up to the ridge with me. He showed me how to build a fire the old way with no matches or lighters. How to arrange the sacred plants and offer tobacco to the 4 directions. The fire spirit lives in the hottest part of the flame, he explained. You have to talk to it through the fire. Show respect. Offer it what it needs without letting it take everything. As the sun went down, we started the ceremony. Joseph sang in Cherokee while I kept the fire burning steady. The air around us got warmer and warmer, even though there was no wind. Then it appeared. The fire creature came out of the darkness, bigger than I'd ever seen it. 10 feet tall, made of flames, that danced and flickered but never went out. Its coal-black eyes stared at us from that burning face. "Keep singing," Joseph whispered. "Don't look directly at it." The creature circled our fire, getting closer with each step. I could feel the heat from its body making my skin tight and dry. The smell of sulfur filled the air. Joseph threw more tobacco into our fire and said something in Cherokee. The creature stopped moving. For a moment, I thought the ceremony was working. The fire spirit seemed to be listening. Then it reached out toward Joseph. "Run!" the old man shouted, pushing me away from the fire. But there was nowhere to run. In seconds, the creature had surrounded us with a wall of flame 20 feet high. We were trapped in a circle of fire that burned without any fuel, flames that reached up toward the stars. The spirit moved toward me, and I could see my death in those black eyes. It was going to do to me what it had done to Carol, burn me from the inside out. That's when I remembered the water. There was a spring about 50 yards away, down in a little hollow. If I could reach it, maybe the water would protect me like Joseph said. I ran for the gap between 2 walls of flame, feeling the fire spirit right behind me. The heat was so intense my clothes started smoking. My hair singed. My lungs felt like I was breathing fire. I dove through the flames and rolled down the hill toward the spring. Behind me, I could hear a sound like a forest screaming. I reached the water and threw myself into it. The spring was only 3 feet deep, but the water was ice cold from flowing underground. Steam rose up around me as the water cooled my burned skin. The fire creature appeared at the edge of the spring, but it wouldn't come any closer to the water. It stood there burning like a torch, those black eyes fixed on me. Then it spoke. Not words exactly, but I understood. Odd what it meant. This is my mountain, my forest. Leave and don't come back. I stayed in that spring until dawn, watching the creature pace back and forth at the water's edge. When the sun came up, it faded away like morning mist. I found Joseph's body where the ceremony fire had been. He had died the same way as Carol, burned from the inside out. I retired from the Forest Service 2 weeks later. Told them I had health problems, couldn't work outdoors anymore. It wasn't entirely a lie. I couldn't stand to be around any kind of fire after what happened on Devil's Backbone. Even lighting a cigarette made my hands shake. The ridge was officially closed to all public access. The Forest Service said it was due to extreme fire danger during drought conditions. They put up signs and barriers, but they couldn't put up signs warning about what was really up there. I moved to town and got a job at the hardware store. Safe, indoor work with no fires and no forests. My son called me a few times, worried about why I quit so suddenly. He was thinking about following the family tradition, becoming a wildland firefighter like his dad and grandpa. I told him to find a different job. Told him there were things in those mountains that fire training couldn't prepare him for. He thought I was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe I was. But every summer, when the drought comes and the fire danger gets high, I read the reports from Cherokee National Forest. And sometimes I see things that remind me of Devil's Backbone. Fires that start without ignition sources. Burn patterns that don't make scientific sense. Temperatures that are impossible for the conditions. The Forest Service always finds explanations. Equipment malfunction. Unusual weather patterns. Human error. They never mention fire spirits or Cherokee ceremonies or things that burn people from the inside out. But I know the truth. And that thing up on Devil's Backbone is still there, still hungry. The drought of 1989 woke it up, and it's never really gone back to sleep. Sometimes at night when the weather is hot and dry and the wind smells like smoke, I think about Joseph Burning Wolf and those old ceremonies. I wonder if anyone else remembers how to keep the fire spirits sleeping. I wonder what's going to happen the next time the mountains don't get enough rain. My name is Robert McKenna. I fought fires for 21 years before I learned that some fires can't be fought. If you're ever hiking in the Cherokee National Forest and you see signs that say, "Closed, extreme fire danger," believe them. And if you see perfect circles burned into the ground where fire shouldn't be able to start, don't get any closer. Some things are better left sleeping. This account was recorded in 1995. Devil's Backbone Ridge remains closed to public access during high fire danger periods. Similar incidents have been reported in fire-prone regions throughout the southeastern United States during extreme drought years.